All right, and just checking to make sure we are streaming. Yes, we are live. All right. Let's see what. A second. Give me 1 second to get everything straight. Okay. We are ready to roll. Okay, so today is a very special day on the Vaishnav calendar, which we'll be speaking a little bit about in class, or maybe the whole class will be about it. We'll have to see how it goes. Today is the appearance day of Lochan Das Thakur, who is a very important Vaishnava. He composed the Chaitanya Mangal. So we're going to chant the famous song, one of Prabhupada's favorite songs, which is Parama Karuna Bahudvijanam Nitai Gora Chand, and actually it's entitled Shri Shri Gora Nityananda. That means the mercy of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, which is very nice. So, and actually I'll tell a story about this poem after we finish chanting. Paramakaruna Dvijana Nitai Gorachan Paramakaruna. What, sorry. Paramakaruna Dvijana Nitai Gorachan Shabbat Avatara Jara Shiromani Kevalananda Kanda Kevalananda Kanda Shabbat Avatara Jara Shiromani Kevalananda Kanda Bajo Bajo Bai Chaitanya Nitai Shudrida Vishvashakori Baja Baja Bai Chaitanya Nitai Sudrida Vishvashakori Vishaya Jariya Seirat Seimajia Muke Bolo Hari Hari Vishaya Jariya Seirat Seimajia Muke Bolo Hari Hari Deko Hore Bai Tribhuvan Nai Doyala Dada Deko Hore Bai Tribhuvan Nai Hemona Dayala Dada Ashu Aki Jure Pashana Vidahure Shuli Jara Gunagata Ashu Pak Ashu Paki Jure Pashana Vitare Shuni Jara Gunagata Samsare Majia Rohili Buria Sepadena Ilohasha Samsare Majia Rohili Buria Sepadena Ilohasha Apana Karama Unjai Shamana Kahelo Janadasa Apana Karama Unjai Shamana Kahelo Janadasa Paramakaruna Podvijana Nitai Gorachan Paramakaruna Podvijana Nitai Gorachan Javak Avatara Shiromani Evanandakana Shabbat Avatara Shiromani Evanandakana Karuna Jijana Nitago Jan Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahansa, Parapatikacharya, also Tata, Satashi Shimad, His Divine Grace Avaya, Charanada Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Mahārishila Prabhupada, Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Anantakoti, Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya, Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Brahmasay Kaho, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Shadwaita Gadadha, Shivasadi Gaur, Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopinath, Shai Mukunda, Radhakunda, Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavanam Ki Jai, Machuradam Ki Jai, Jagadasami Ki Jai, Munamai Ki Jai, Shrimati Lalasi Devi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda Haribo. All glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious the assembled devotees, all glorious the assembled devotees. All glorious to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Namah Om Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale, Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Trinamani Namaste, Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharni Nivishesha Shindivadi, Paschatya Dejatarni. So the sound level shows it's fine. I guess just one person has low sound. According to this, the sound is normal. So let me repeat, or let me give the translation to this poem by Narottama Das Thakur. The two Lord, and not Narottama Das Thakur, Lochand Das Thakur, whose appearance day it is today. The two Lords, Nittai Gaurachandra, Lord Nittai, and Lord Chaitanya, are very merciful. They are the essence of all incarnations, and that their specific significance is that by prosecuting their way of self-realization is simply joyful, for they introduce chanting and dancing. My dear brother, I request that you just worship Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda with firm conviction and faith. If one gives up sense gratification to be Krishna conscious by this process, one is sure to reach the desired goal. One has simply to chant Hare Krishna Hare without any sense gratifying motive. My dear brother, you just try and examine this. Within the three worlds, there is no one like Lord Chaitanya or Lord Nityananda, because their merciful qualities are so great that they make even birds and beasts cry. What to speak of human beings? Even stone will melt at the chanting. My dear mind, you are entrapped in sense gratification and have no attraction for chanting Hare Krishna. Since you have no attraction for the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, what can I say? I can simply think of my misfortune. Lochand Das Thakur Ki Jai. So there's a poem by Lochand Das Thakur. I said I was mentioning a story about Srila Prabhupada, and this particular poem, because it's one of Prabhupada's favorite poems. When Srila Prabhupada was turned around North America, he arrived in Atlanta, Georgia, at the temple, of course. And he sat down on the Vyasa-san, and he began to chant this song. Of course, first he said, the two lordships are very, very merciful. He was looking at Gaur-Nitai. They only had Gaur-Nitai deities at that particular juncture. And when Prabhupada began to chant, he went into trance, and the devotees didn't know what to do. Paramakarana Vahutu Yeshanam Nittai Gaurachandra. The devotees didn't know what to do, so after a few minutes, one of the devotees started chanting Hare Krishna, and Prabhupada came out of his trance, and the devotees asked Srila Prabhupada, what should we do if you go in trance? And Prabhupada replied in a very humble way, I do not do that very often. So Prabhupada didn't give direct instructions, but obviously the devotees should respect Srila Prabhupada's ecstatic dealings like that. So, with that in mind, I want to speak a little bit about Lochand Das Thakur, who was one of the primary biographers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One of the very, very primary biographers of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And as I said before, he wrote the Chaitanya Mangal. So here's the story. He took birth in a family of brahmanas. So Omagana Timiranga Shagana Jana Shlakya Chakshur Meditam Yena Tasmai Shigarveda Maha. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master's divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, who was kindly enlightened me with a torchlight of knowledge while I was blind in the darkness of ignorance. So, he took birth in a family of brahmanas right near Mayapur in Bardhaman. I don't know if anyone here has been in Bardhaman. I have. It's one of the main train stations near Mayapur. So, he met the devotees of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, took initiation from Narahari Sarika. In his Chaitanya Mangal, Lochand Das writes, my hope of hopes is to be near the lotus feet of Sri Narahari Thakur, to serve and worship him with my very life. The cherished desire of the fallen Lochand Das is to be allowed by the grace of Narahari to sing the glories of Sri Gauranga. My Lord is Sri Narahari Thakur, and I am his servant, bowing and praying before him. I beg him to allow me his service. This is my only aspiration. So in other words, his Guru Bhakti was the key for his connection with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Of course, he is also an eternal associate of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he composed the Chaitanya Mangal in a style called Panchali. And let's see what else we have here. He was also married, and he lived in Srikhanda with his spiritual master. And the material that Lochandas Thakur utilized to compose this Chaitanya Mangal was a Sanskrit book by Murari Gupta. Of course, Murari Gupta is Hanuman in Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela, or was Hanuman in his past. And Murari Gupta wrote it was actually his diary called the Chaitanya Charitamritam. So he actually took directly from the diary of Chaitanya, of Murari Gupta. And originally, the Chaitanya Bhagavat was called the Chaitanya Mangal, but he changes the Chaitanya Bhagavat after Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami gave the Chaitanya Bhagavat the name Chaitanya Bhagavat, because Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in his Chaitanya Charitamrita wrote that the Krishna Leela Bhagavate Kahi Veda Vyas Chaitanya Leelara Vyasa Vrindavanas, that Veda Vyas has appeared as Vrindavandas Thakur, who wrote the Chaitanya Bhagavat. And actually there's many pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that have only been touched upon very briefly by Vrindavandas Thakur or Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. And so these pastimes, especially the early pastimes in Sridhar Mayapur, are described in detail in the Chaitanya Mangal by Lochan Das Thakur. And he actually, there's a whole summary here, which I'm not going to cite, of the Chaitanya Mangal. Anyway, whole summary. So I think we'll go on to the Chaitanya, we'll go on to the Krishna book like we normally do at this particular time. And we invite you all to read the Chaitanya Mangal sometime. It's available on the internet, and there's many translations of it from Bengali. It's very simple Bengali, so it's very easy to translate it. Let's see what else we have here about Lochandas Thakur. That was Prabhupada's translation that I read of the Paramakarana. Okay. And that happy note, we'll go on to the Krishna book, and hopefully we'll be able to finish up the prayers to the Personified Vedas, prayers of the Personified Vedas today. So let's share the screen and go on to Krishna book. See if I can find it. I have so many windows open. Here it is. So we're in the final portion of the prayers of the Personified Vedas. And of course these prayers are philosophical, and this is the longest chapter in the Krishna book. We've actually spent 4 days reading this chapter so far. And this will be the 5th day, and I think we'll be able to finish today. Most of it is very simple information that Srila Prabhupada has actually given us before. There's some information here that we have not discussed before that in the previous part of this particular chapter, like the different darshans, like the Sankhya philosophy, the Vaisheshika philosophy, the Yoga philosophy, the Mimamsa philosophy, the Uttara Mimamsa philosophy. And if you're interested in understanding these things, you can read the chapter yourself. So, here we go. Only through devotional service can one understand how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by his inconceivable potencies, simultaneously acts impersonally and as a person. He acts just like the supreme enjoyer, and many thousands of kings and chiefs work under him, called demigods. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the supreme independent controlling person, and all the demigods, including Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, Indra, the king of heaven, the king of the moon planet, and the king of the sun planet, work under his direction. The Vedas confirm that it is out of fear of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, and the fire is distributing heat. The material nature produces all kinds of moving and non-moving objects within the material world, but none of them can independently act or create without the direction of the support of the Supreme Lord. All of them act as his tributaries, just like subordinate kings who offer their annual taxes to the emperor. Easy to understand. The Vedic injunctions state that every living entity lives by eating the remnants of food offered to the personality of Godhead. In great sacrifices, the injunction is that Narayana should be present as the supreme predominating deity of the sacrifice, and that after the sacrifice is performed, the remnants of food should be distributed among the demigods. This is called Yajna Bhaga. Every demigod has an allotment of Yajna Bhaga, which he accepts as prasadam. The conclusion is the demigods are not independently powerful. They are posted as different executives under the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they eat prasadam, or the remnants of sacrifices. So in other words, if you want to worship the demigods and put the demigods on your altar, we are not going to object to it, although we're not going to do that. We say that you should put the demigods, whatever demigods you're worshiping, on a lower level than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the hierarchy. He's at the top, Ekali Ishvara Krishna, Arasabda Brija. And then when you offer food, bhoga, to Krishna, then you take that food, the bhoga, which becomes transformed to prasadam, that means the Lord's mercy, and then you offer it to the demigods. That's the process. That is the process, just like the demigods are devotees. Just like, I'm trying to be a devotee too. I eat prasadam after it's offered. I do not eat bhoga. Devotees don't eat bhoga. Never. If you eat bhoga, then you're verily eating sin, pap. Pap means sin. That's what Bhagavad Gita says. They execute the order of the Supreme Lord exactly according to his plan. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is in the background, and because his orders are carried out by others, it appears that he is impersonal. In our grossly materialistic way, we cannot conceive how the Supreme Person is above the impersonal activities of material nature. For example, if you go to any big company that is owned or controlled by one person, most likely you will not meet that person, and will appear that all these underlings, that is the employees, are carrying out the work of the company automatically, and they're just somehow or other coordinating with each other. But there is one person in charge of the company, at least in a proprietorship. And if you are very qualified, especially in a big company, you may be able to meet that one person. But if you're not qualified, you won't be able to meet him. That's right. Let's say you go to the Tesla company and you want to meet Elon. And you say, I'd like to meet him. And they say, you can't. And you say, therefore, I don't think he exists because I don't see him. Well, got news for you. He's so exalted materially, not exalted. But let's say he has such a high position, you have to be qualified to meet him. Now, if you were another rich man, or if you were, let's say, had a good business deal, then you may get a chance to meet him. In the same way, if you were a pure devotee, you will get the chance to meet Krishna, but otherwise, you just see the material energy, which is evidence of design, evidence of a supreme person. Just like in the business field, the company or the factory. Things are not happening by chance, but they're happening because someone has designed it, or someone is in charge ultimately, or hires the designers. Therefore, the Lord explains in the Bhagavad Gita that there's nothing superior to him, and that the impersonal Brahman is subordinately situated as a manifestation of his personal rays. Brahmano hi pratishtaham. Actually, there's several verses Prabhupada is making reference to when he, in the sentence. Also, mata parataram nanyak kinshit astid dhananjaya. Mai sarvam idam proktam shutre manikana iva. Which is a really interesting verse in the Bhagavad Gita. It says, everything rests on me, Krishna says. Just like pearls are strung on a thread, sutre manigana iva. And so in the same way, you may see a row of pearls on a thread, but you don't see the thread, if they're strung very tightly. Sripad Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse in this regard. Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who has no material senses, but through whose direction and will all the material senses are working. He is the supreme potency of all material senses or sense organs. He is omnipotent, and he is the supreme performer of everything. Therefore, he is worshipable by everyone. Unto that supreme person do I offer my respectful obeisances. Krishna himself declares in Bhagavad Gita that because he is transcendental to all sentient and insentient beings, he is known as insentient beings without senses. He is known as Purushottama, which means the Supreme Personality. Purusha means person, and Uttama means supreme or transcendental. In another place, the Lord says that as the air is situated in the all-pervading sky, everyone is situated in him, and everyone is acting under his direction. The Vedas personified continue. Dear Lord, they prayed you were equal to all, with no partiality towards a particular type of living entity. So practically all this information is in Bhagavad Gita. This is not new. These are just statements that are already made in Bhagavad Gita, and you can actually correspond the different statements of the Vedas personified with different verses in Bhagavad Gita. It's interesting. For example, you were equal to all with no partiality towards a particular type of living entity. Samoham sarvabhuteshu name dvisho stinapriya. That's Bhagavad Gita. It is due to their own, which says the same thing. It is due to their own material desires that all living entities enjoy or suffer in different conditions of life. In other words, we are responsible for our suffering and enjoyment. Don't blame God. As your parts and parcels, they are just like the sparks of a fire. Just as sparks dance in a blazing fire, all living entities are dancing on your support. You are providing them with everything they desire, and yet you are not responsible for their position of enjoyment or suffering. There are different types of living entities: demigods, human beings, animals, trees, birds, beasts, germs, worms, insects, and aquatics, and all enjoy or suffer while resting on you. The living entities are of two kinds. One class is called Nitya Mukta, ever liberated. Prabhupada is Nitya Mukta. And the other is called Nitya Bada, ever conditioned. You can remember that by Bada, bad, always bad. The Nitya Mukta living entities are in the spiritual kingdom, and the Nitya Badas are in the material world. That's us. In the spiritual world, both the living entities and the Lord are manifest in their original status, like live sparks in a blazing fire. But in the material world, although the Lord is all-pervasive in his impersonal feature, Mayatamidam Sarvam Jagadabhyaktamurtina, the living entities have forgotten their Krishna consciousness to a greater or lesser degree, just as sparks sometimes fall from a blazing fire and lose their original brilliant condition. The sparks fall into different conditions and retain more or less of their original brilliance. Some sparks fall under dry grass and thus ignite another big fire. This is a reference to the pure devotees who take compassion on the poor and innocent living entities. So in other words, the pure devotee ignites the fire of Krishna consciousness in the hearts of the conditioned living entities. Of course, there's an opposite example of pure devotees. Pure devotees extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. And that's the first verse of the Guru Vastika, which we chant every day. So either they extinguish the blazing fire of material existence, or they light the fire of Krishna consciousness in our own hearts, the fire of Satchidananda, eternity, bliss, and knowledge. The pure devotee ignites Krishna consciousness in the hearts of the conditioned souls, and thus the blazing fire of the spiritual world becomes manifest even within this material world. Some sparks fall into water. They immediately lose their original brilliance and become extinct. They are compared to the living entities who take their birth in the midst of gross materialists, in which case their original Krishna consciousness becomes extinct. Extinct in the sense of non-manifest. I mean, it's there, but it's not manifest. Some sparks fall to the ground and remain midway between blazing and extinct conditions. We're talking about the modes of nature. Thus, some living entities are without Krishna consciousness, some are between having and not having Krishna consciousness, and some are actually situated in Krishna consciousness. The demigods on the higher planets, Lord Brahma, Indra, Chandra, the sun god, and various other demigods, are all Krishna conscious. Human society, so they're Krishna conscious, but they may not be pure devotees. Lord Brahma in our universe is a pure devotee. Indra sometimes has his challenges. So it's not that he's a pure devotee, but he's a devotee. I mean, he fought with Krishna when Krishna tried to take the Parijata plant from the heavenly planets. So if someone was a pure devotee, he would have said, Krishna, take it. You want more? But he refused to let Krishna take it, and Krishna had to defeat him. Human society is between the demigods and the animals, and thus some humans are more or less Krishna conscious, and some are completely forgetful of Krishna consciousness. The third grade living entities, namely the animals, beasts, plants, trees, and aquatics, have completely forgotten Krishna consciousness. The example stated in the Vedas regarding the sparks of blazing fire is very appropriate for understanding the condition of different types of living entities. But above all other living entities is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, or Purushottama, that means the highest person, who is always liberated from all material conditions. The question may be raised as to why the living entities have fallen by chance into different conditions of life. To answer this question, we first have to understand that there cannot be any influence of chance for the living entities. Chance is for non-living entities. According to Vedic literature, living entities have knowledge, and thus they are called Chaitanya, which means in knowledge. Their situation in different conditions of life, therefore, is not accidental. It is by their choice. We're here by our choice because they have knowledge. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, give up everything and just surrender to me. The process of realizing the Supreme Personality of Godhead is open for everyone, but still it is the choice of the particular living entity whether to accept or reject this proposal. In the last portion of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna very plainly says to Arjuna, my dear Arjuna, now I have spoken everything to you. Now you may choose to accept it or not. Similarly, the living entities who have come down to this material world have made their own choice to enjoy this material world. Come down to this material world, have made their own choice to enjoy this material world. Pretty explicit. It is not that Krishna sent them into this world. The material world was created for the enjoyment of living entities who wanted to give up the eternal service of the Lord to become the supreme enjoyer themselves. That is very explicit. We wanted to give up the eternal service of the Lord to become the supreme enjoyer ourselves, our fault. According to Vaishnava philosophy, when a living entity desires to gratify his senses and forgets the service of the Lord, he is given a place in the material world to act freely according to his desire, and therefore he creates a condition of life in which he either enjoys or suffers. We should definitely know that both the Lord and the living entities are eternally cognizant, that means aware. There is no birth or death for either the Lord or the living entities. When creation takes place, this does not mean that the living entities are created. The Lord creates the material world to give the conditioned souls a chance to elevate themselves to the higher platform of Krishna consciousness. If a conditioned soul does not take advantage of this opportunity, but after the dissolution of this material world, he enters into the body of Narayana and remains there in a deep sleep until the time of another creation. So, in other words, that's the purpose of the material world, to rectify us. It's called teleology, the study of purposes. In this connection, the example of the rainy season is very appropriate. Seasonal rainfall may be taken as the agent for creation, because after the rainfall, the wet fields are favorable for growing different types of vegetation. Similarly, as soon as there is creation by the Lord's glancing over the material nature, immediately the living entities spring up in their different living conditions, just as different types of vegetation grow after a rainfall. The rainfall is one, but the creation of the different plants is varied. The rain falls equally on the whole field, but the different plants sprout up in different shapes and forms according to the seeds planted. Similarly, the seeds of our desires are varied. Tell me all about it. Every living entity has a different type of desire, and that desire is the seed, which causes his growth in a certain type of body. This is explained by Rupa Goswami by the word Papa Bija. Bija means seed. Papa means sinful. All our material desires are to be taken as Papa Bija, or the seeds of sinful desires. The Bhagavad Gita explains that our sinful desire is that we do not surrender unto the Supreme Lord. The Lord therefore says in the Bhagavad Gita, I shall give you protection from the reactions of sinful desires. Aham tvam savapapayo mokshayashyami masucha. These sinful desires are manifested in different types of bodies. Therefore, no one can accuse the Supreme Lord of partiality in giving one type of body to a certain type of living entity and another type of body to another living entity. All the bodies of the 8,400,000 species are created according to the mental condition of the individual living entities. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Purushottama, only gives them a chance to act according to their desires. Therefore, the living entities act by taking advantage of the facility given by the Lord. In other words, you ordered this body by your consciousness and by your karma. Two things work together to determine what type of body you will have. For example, just an example, two factors are there to determine what type of car you're going to buy. Your desire and your money. Money is equated metaphorically with karma. And desire is equated with desire. So anyway, so let's say, more practical example. Let's say you want to be a romantic. And let's say you have really not so good karma. So you may become a romantic bird like a pigeon. And if you have, pigeon can have so many romances every day. So many marriages and divorces. Anyway, I know it's not marriages and divorces, but that's what it is. So anyway, and if you have good karma, then you take birth as someone with a lot of money, a lot of facility, and then you could really enjoy romance one after the other. Not enjoy, it's actually suffering. At the same time, the living entities are born. So it's desire and your karma that determines. At the same time, living entities are born from the transcendental body of the Lord. That's at the time of creation. It's not that the soul is born, the soul comes out, and the body is manifest from the energy, the material energy, the pradhan that comes from Krishna. This relationship between the Lord and the living entities is explained in the Vedic literature, where it is said the Supreme Lord maintains all of his children, giving them whatever they want. Similarly, in the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, I am the seed-giving father of all living entities. That's Aham Bija Pradapita. It is very simple to understand that the Father gives birth to the children, but the children act according to their desires. Therefore, the Father is never responsible for the different futures of his children. Each child can take advantage of the Father's property and instruction, but even though the inheritance and instruction may be the same for all the children, ideal situation, out of their different desires, each child creates a different life and thereby suffers or enjoys. Just like in my life, my brother became a doctor and I became a Hare Krishna. So we choose. It's not that the Father told us to do those things. Our Father who art in heaven, hopefully. Similarly, the Bhagavad Gita's instructions are equal for everyone. Everyone should surrender unto the Supreme Lord, and he will take charge of one and protect one from sinful reactions. The facilities of living in the creation of the Lord are equally offered to all living entities. Whatever there is, either in the land or on the land or in the water or in the sky, is equally given to all living entities. Since all living beings are sons of the Supreme Lord, everyone can enjoy the material facilities given by the Lord, but unfortunate living entities create unfavorable conditions of life by fighting among themselves. The responsibility for this fighting and creating favorable and unfavorable situations lies with us, the living entities, not with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Don't blame him. Therefore, if the living entities take advantage of the Lord's instructions as given in the Bhagavad Gita and develop Krishna consciousness, their lives become sublime and they go back to Godhead. One may argue that because this material world is created by the Lord, he is therefore responsible for its conditions. Certainly he is indirectly responsible for the creation and maintenance of this material world, but he is never responsible for the different conditions of the living entities. Just like the government who makes a prison or builds a prison is not responsible for what's happening or how the living entities in the prison are treated. It depends on what crime they commit. And that dependence on whatever crime they commit determines where or what sort of punishment they get. The Lord's creation of this material world is compared to a cloud's creation of vegetation. In the rainy season, the cloud creates different varieties of vegetation. The cloud pours water on the surface of the earth, but it never touches the earth directly. Similarly, the Lord creates this material world simply by glancing over the material energy. This is confirmed in the Vedas. He threw his glance over the material nature, and thus there was creation. And he said, "Let there be light." In the Bhagavad Gita, it is also confirmed that simply by his transcendental glance over the material nature, he creates different varieties of living entities, both moving and non-moving, living and dead. So that glance, as we mentioned before, is called Shambhu. And he, Shambhu, Lord Shiva, consorts with the material energy and impregnates the material energy and implants us within the material energy. So that's Krishna's glance. The creation of the material world can therefore be taken as one of the pastimes of the Lord. It is called one of the Lord's pastimes because he creates this material world whenever he desires. This desire of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also extreme mercy on his part because it gives us, the conditioned souls, another chance to develop their original consciousness and thus go back to Godhead. Therefore, no one can blame the Supreme Lord for creating the material world. From the subject matter under discussion, we can gain a clear understanding of the difference between the impersonalists and the personalists. The impersonal conception recommends merging into the existence of the Supreme, and the voidist philosophy recommends making all material varieties void. It means shunya. Both, that means nothing. Both these philosophies are known as Mayavada. Certainly the cosmic manifestation comes to a close and becomes void when the living entities merge into the body of Narayan to rest until another creation. And this may be called an impersonal condition, but these conditions are never eternal. The cessation of the variegatedness of the material world and the merging of the living entities into the body of the Supreme are not permanent because the creation will take place again and the living entities who merge into the body of the Supreme without having developed their Krishna consciousness will again appear in this material world when there is another creation. The Bhagavad Gita confirms this fact. that the material world is created and annihilated perpetually, and that conditioned souls without Krishna consciousness come back again and again whenever the material creation is manifest. If such conditioned souls take advantage of this opportunity and develop Krishna consciousness under the direct instruction of the Lord, then they are transferred to the spiritual world and do not have to come back to the material creation. It is said, therefore, that the voidists and impersonalists are not very intelligent because they do not take shelter under the lotus feet of the Lord. Because they are less intelligent, these voidists and impersonalists take to different types of austerities, either to attain the stage of nirvana. Nirvana means just a negation of the material world, which means finishing the material conditions of life, or to attain oneness by merging into the body of the Lord. All of them again fall down because they neglect the lotus feet of the Lord. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the author, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, after studying all the Vedic literatures and hearing from all authorities, has given his opinion that Krishna is the only supreme master and that all living entities are his eternal servants. That's Ekala Ishvara Krishna Arasabda Vricha, is the Bengali. His statement is confirmed by the prayers by the personified Vedas. The conclusion is, therefore, that everyone is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everyone is serving under the supreme direction of the Lord, and everyone is afraid of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is out of fear of Him that activities are rightly executed. Everyone's position is to be subordinate to the Supreme Lord, yet the Lord has no partiality in His view of the living entities. He is just like the unlimited sky, as the sparks of a fire dance in the fire. Similarly, all living entities are like birds flying in the unlimited sky of the Supreme Lord. Some of them are flying very high, some are flying at a lower altitude, and some are flying at still lower altitude. The different birds are flying in different positions according to their respective abilities, but the sky has nothing to do with this ability. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord confirms that He awards different positions to different living entities in proportion to their surrender. Again, Yayatam Prabhajante Tam Sataiva Bhajamyam, 4th chapter. This proportional reward by the personality of God into the living entities is not partiality. Therefore, in spite of the living entities always being under the control of the Supreme Personality of God in their different positions, spheres, and species of life, He is never responsible for their different living conditions. It is foolish and artificial, therefore, to think oneself equal to the Supreme Lord, and it is still more foolish to think that one has not seen God. Everyone is seeing God according to his capacity. The only difference is that the theist sees God as the Supreme Personality, the most beloved Krishna, and the atheist sees the Absolute Truth as ultimate death. See how much more time. Wow, still more in the chapter. Long chapter. We'll do one more paragraph and see how much more. The personified Vedas continue to pray, Dear Lord, they said, from all Vedic information, it is to be understood that you are the supreme controller and all living entities are controlled. Both the Lord and the living entities are called Nitya, eternal, and so are qualitatively one, yet the singular Nitya, or the Supreme Lord, is the controller, whereas the plural Nityas are controlled. The plural eternals, that's us. The individual controlled living entity resides within the body of the Supreme Controller, as Supersoul is also present there, but the Supersoul controls the individual soul. That is the verdict of the Vedas. If the individual soul were not controlled by the Supersoul, then how could one explain the Vedic version that a living entity transmigrates from one body to another and enjoys or suffers the effects of his past deeds? Which means the Supersoul remembers, sometimes being promoted to a higher standard of life, and sometimes being degraded to a lower standard. Thus, the conditioned souls are not only under the control of the Supreme Lord, but are also conditioned by the control of material nature. This relationship of the living entities with the Supreme Lord as the controlled and the controller definitely prove that although the Supersoul is all-pervasive, the individual living entities are never all-pervasive. If the individual souls were all-pervasive, there would be no question of their being controlled. The theory that the Supersoul and the individual soul are equal is therefore a polluted conclusion, and no sensible person accepts it. Rather, one should try to understand the distinction between the supreme eternal and subordinate eternals. We are subordinate eternals. Let's see how much more we have in this chapter. Wow, looks like we have quite a bit. All right, so we're going to have another day of going through this chapter. Let's go back. Okay, we're going to stop sharing, and maybe tomorrow we'll finish the chapter. This is the fifth day we spent on this chapter. Let's allow you to unmute yourselves. So anyone has a question, you can raise your hand, or you can type in the chat window, or you can unmute yourself. Does anyone have a question? I mean, this chapter repeats the same point over and over and over again. So basically, so we'll get the point that we are subordinate, we are responsible for where we are. Uh, Ultimately, the supreme absolute truth is a person, and to surrender to him is the ultimate goal. So you find the same philosophical point repeated again and again and again. Of course, what I was very happy to read today was that originally we were in the spiritual world and we decided to give up our service for Krishna, which is what Prabhupada says in this particular chapter. Very, very explicit description. So, who has a question? I think Mataji Tulsi has a question.
Some my basins.
Yeah.
So it just seems like, okay, we get our body according to our previous desires and activities. It almost seems like hopeless that we can fight against our body inclination.
No. You don't have to follow the bodily inclinations. Where is that stated? You're supposed to tolerate the body's pushings and pullings. Vacho vegam, manasa kroda vegam. Yes, I mean, we're stuck with this body, that's true. We're stuck with a body that has certain pushings and pullings, but you don't have to give in to the pushings and pullings. Just like, let's say someone's married and they have a kid, they're stuck with the kid, right? I mean, hopefully they're not going to just like dump the kid off. Anyway, so they're stuck with the kid. They have to just tolerate it. I've been on an airplane. The parents are stuck with the kid. They can't give the kid to me. Right? They can't give the kid to me. So they're.
I'd like to.
I'm sure they would, but they're stuck. And it's causing them misery, and they have to just tolerate. They can't just like go beat the kid up or put a bandana on his mouth or something like that. So we're stuck with the body for this lifetime, and we just have to make the best use of a bad bargain. It's like you have a car, you're stuck with the car, you can only go a certain speed. The car may burn oil or whatever it is, but it's up to you how you use the car. Like that. We're stuck with a lot of things. We're stuck with our financial situation. We may have a little or a lot of money, but it's up to us how we deal with the situation. Let's say you have a little money, you don't have it's up to you whether you're going to be depressed or just see Krishna behind everything. So there's many examples like that where we're stuck with things, and you just have to make the best, just tolerate, make the best use, and however much energy you have to serve Krishna, use the body. And if the body is extremely angry, has a tendency towards anger or lust, then you just have to tolerate it. That's your burden. If you're given a body that just like naturally at a moment's notice gets angry, or let's say the body doesn't get angry, obviously, but let's say secretes certain hormones, so you get angry hormones like that, and it happens. You have more to tolerate. You have to tolerate anger. And you got that angry body because of your past desires, and you got what you deserved, but right now you got to stick with it. And you're given the intelligence and the strength by Krishna to tolerate it. every one of us can tolerate what we've been given in Krishna's service and go on serving Krishna. What is that verse? Tatena kampam sushamikshan mana punjanivatma kratam vipakam ridvag purvir vidanam namaste jiveta yo mukti pade sadayavak. One should just tolerate whatever one has to be subjected to, thinking what one is subjected to is a token reaction or a reaction for one's past activities, and then you go on not only tolerating but offering service to Krishna with your body, mind, and words. Fridvad Vapur Bir Vidanam Namaste. Okay, let's give someone else an opportunity to ask a question. All right, who else has a question here? Someone else ask a question. We got 3 more minutes. No one else has a question. Oh, Mr. Gopal Das in India, enjoying India and neglecting his Guru Maharaj here in the United States, uh, where it's about 20 degrees right now. It's going to be 9 degrees early in the morning, and his poor Guru Maharaj is suffering, and he's just like enjoying life, being the cynosure of all eyes there in Vrindavan or Mayapur.
I'll take your blessings, Gurudev. Thank you.
Where are you now, in Mayapur or Vrindavan?
I'm in Sri Vrindavan Dham.
Okay, I'm sure that you're getting a lot of appreciation there. So, what's the question?
So, Gurudev, you were speaking about, we're given the power to tolerate, and it's our choice. But then we also see those living entities that come out as children and without, so much resources, and then they're not properly maintained or raised or cared for, even by their parents, what to speak of the other, potential guardians.
Yes. Yeah, so
and we're seeing so much neglect, if not outright abuse, of living entities that haven't yet been given the education or resources to tolerate it, and it has lifelong effects on many of these living entities.
Yeah.
So what is Krishna providing for those living entities?
If one desires the facility to tolerate whatever one has to tolerate, and certain people, I'm not complaining about anything I have to tolerate. It's minimal compared to what many other people have to tolerate, because many people came from dysfunctional childhoods for one reason or other. If one really wants to become Krishna conscious, Krishna will give one the intelligence and facility to tolerate, and the strength to tolerate, if one actually has the desire to become Krishna conscious. Dhammi buddhi yogam tam yenam abnupyantate tesham satayuktatam pajatam pratipurvakam. I mean, some people have to tolerate more than other people have to tolerate. And, Krishna there's a reason for that. Nothing happens by chance. There's a reason for that. But if one really wants to get out of this world, everyone is given the facility. If they don't want to get out of the material world, you're not given the facility to get out of the material world.
So when we see people that even they're struggling with mental illness, and there's chemical and physical reasons that are abundantly obvious that make it impossible for them to really function within a service atmosphere, does that mean that somewhere deep down there's that desire that they just didn't want to?
There's always the opportunity to chant. They may not be able to move into the brahmachari ashram or move into a temple or whatever, but the holy name of the Lord is available for everyone in every circumstance. And we've seen
Sometimes we see people that chant, but at the same time they're chanting, they're also committing, pretty severe offenses to other.
That's their desire. Everything's based on desire. That's their desire. Someone's committing offenses, that's their desire, and they'll have to suffer, and they're going to lose the taste for chanting and have to take birth again.
Depending on their upbringing or situation or former dysfunction, is there any mitigation of the results of those offenses?
Yeah, they have to continue chanting and beg for forgiveness if they're committing offenses against Vaishnavas. If they're sincere, they'll get the intelligence to do that. Nothing happens by accident. I mean, look at that story about Pigpen.
Yeah.
He was definitely challenged, but he was sincere. And then he became a great devotee. There's no time to tell this story now. But he became a great devotee. I mean, who was more challenged than him? I mean, really, he was far out. The devotees wouldn't even let him move in the temple, but he just plopped himself in the temple and took shelter of Prabhupada and became a great devotee, was giving Bhagavatam class and went back to Godhead, God. I mean, what the situation that we're in or you're in is nothing compared to that. So he did it. He did it, and he was definitely, I would say, crazy before. Certifiably crazy. Okay, on that happy note, there's hope for everybody. It's a question of desire. We take responsibility. Not that the devil made me do it, my body made me do it, my mind made me do it, Maya made me do it. We have the ability to tolerate, and take responsibility. If I didn't tolerate, I mean, you don't have to get guilty. Actually, it's funny. Today I asked someone for guilt and they gave me guilt. Anyway, so nobody will understand what that means. Okay, so actually we'll just take Vijay Radhika. Real quick question.
Oh, this is Vijay Radhika's daughter. Hare Krishna.
Hi, Krishna.
Hare Krishna. I'm just starting out with meditating and with doing the rounds. And I was wondering, like, how is there a particular time or state of mind that you have to be in before you start, or can you just do it anytime?
Anytime, actually. Lord Chaitanya says there's no hard and fast rule for chanting. I mean, you can start chanting. I mean, I don't suggest chanting rounds while you're driving a car because it can get a little dangerous. But you can do it while you're walking, and you can chant out loud without the beads, obviously. No, there's no, whatever time, place, circumstances you feel comfortable with. I mean, sometimes I walk while I'm chanting, sometimes I sit down while I'm chanting. Whatever, yeah, whenever you feel comfortable with, all right?
Yes, thank you, Gurudev. Hare Krishna.
All right, happy to help you. Okay, we'll end here. Pray for us because it's very cold out. It's 20 degrees now, and it will be much colder. 20 degrees Fahrenheit, not centigrade. And it's going to be much colder tonight. Just pray that we will not end up freezing to death tonight. Okay, well, glory.